Yeah, I was about to
Oh.
say you can't be making tofu jokes with all those LaCroix behind you.
All right, so this is episode number 20 of Farm to Markets, and today we are talking about preferred securities in a low yield world, decentralized finance, and we have another lightning round at the end of the show. In today's low yield world, investors are looking everywhere to find something that will give them more than 1% without taking exorbitant risks. One option for investors has been preferred securities, as their yields typically pay more than a bond. And so basically, preferred security is that if a bond and a stock got together and have a baby, that's essentially what a preferred security is. So preferred securities have some benefits to them that they typically pay more than like a corporate bond would, and they're typically less correlated with the stock market. And they are in terms of if a company were to go into bankruptcy, a preferred security is a little higher up on the food chain, meaning that if the company goes bankrupt, bondholders have first right to the assets, and then any assets that are available after that go to the preferred securities holder, and then anything left of that goes to the common stockholders at the end of the chain. But so given those features, Joe, why aren't more people using preferred securities in this low interest rate world?
Well, if sticking to the analogy that a preferred security is the love child between a common stock and a bond, unfortunately, it's a very ugly love child. And what generally happens is that, as you stated earlier, when interest rates are incredibly low, people are looking for any other sort of alternative, and they're more than willing to overlook the risks of preferred securities, and there's a certain level of attractiveness to them. The problem with them is that, as you know, the Achilles heel of bonds, interest rates go up, bond values go down, and unlike a bond, a preferred security never matures. You never get your full money back. So you could, in fact, buy a preferred security that might be paying 3% in a low interest rate environment like now, but if prevailing interest rates on preferred securities go to 5, 6, 7, 8%, you're looking at an investment that's going to be selling for 50 cents in the dollar, and that's a risk many people ought not to be taking.
Drew?
Well said. I agree with both of you guys in your analogies. However, I consider preferred stock to be more like a shrimp milkshake. Independently, shrimp and milkshakes are great, but when you put them together, they tend to bring out the worst of each other. Much of the time, preferred shares have less upside potential than their common share counterparts, and they carry more risk than bonds, is what my dad touched on. There are some pros, like you said, Tom. They typically carry higher yields than common shares, and they have a higher position on the payout order if the company runs into solvency issues. But I don't think the pros come close to outweighing the cons. The biggest drawback when it comes to preferred securities is the callback provision. So on the stock side, the callback provision limits their upside potential, because once the stock is valued over par, presumably the company would just call the stock and you'd be left with some money to invest in a low interest rate environment. Now on the bond side, if the callback provision makes them more sensitive to changes in interest rates than non-callable bonds. If rates go up, the value of the preferred share will go down. And if interest rates go down, the product will get called. And like I said, you're left with this pile of cash looking to put it somewhere in a low interest rate environment. Maybe there's a time and place. Maybe there's a person out there who likes shrimp slushies, but most of the time, I don't think the two should mesh.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, and everything you said is exactly right. Ideally, you would want to purchase a preferred security when interest rates are really high, and then have interest rates come down, because then your preferred security would be worth more. But like Drew said, I think the ultimate point is, while there's some advantages to holding preferred securities, the risk that you have to take with a preferred security kind of outweighs the benefit that you get from it. Like, for instance, you can buy like an Apple, one of Apple's corporate bonds that's paying about 2.8% right now, and you give up about a 1.5% yield if from holding the Apple bond versus holding to like a preferred security. the thing is that Apple's probably not going bankrupt anytime soon. So while you're getting 3%, which isn't bad, the risk of anything bad happening to Apple in the next 5 to 10 years is pretty slim. And the same thing with Boeing. Is that if you hold a Boeing corporate bond right now, you're getting 5.8%. And while Boeing's certainly on some dicey ground right now, if something bad happens to the company's still obligated to pay their bond. And they have a lot of airplanes, a lot of inventory, a lot of factories, a lot of equipment that they can sell to come up with the cash to cover that bond. So, if you're going to take a risk on a company's, if you're going to take some risk while trying to find some yield, you might as well just buy like a higher yielding corporate bond than go with the preferred security.
Yeah, I agree with that. I really don't see the need to do a hybrid between either a higher yielding corporate bond, or if you really want yield and you want to buy a stock, why not just buy a dividend yielding stock? Many of them on, the Dow Jones are paying 4 or 5% right now. And it doesn't come with any of the headache that would come from a preferred security. Right now, on a short-term basis, even if you're getting 6%, you're not even beating inflation anyways. So maybe you want yield, but really right now it seems the yield is only in stock price appreciation or mutual fund ETFs. You're, at least again short-term, you're locking in a loss if you're even if you're getting something higher yield that comes with some extra risk. So we don't really deal with preferred securities, or at least I don't, on a day-to-day basis. And there doesn't right now seem to be a good reason why we should start. So,
and Alex brings up a good point, is that if you hold like a preferred securities fund, the fund itself is yielding around like 4, almost 5%. But if you were just to hold VYM, which is yielding about 3%, you're losing on the dividend end. But VYM is appreciated almost 17% this year, which the preferred securities fund has not. And ideally, obviously one of the, I guess you consider it an attribute of, or like a benefit of preferred securities, that they're not overly correlated with the market. But, in like the last 5 years here, those dividend stocks have been getting some pretty nice appreciation with them. And preferred securities haven't. So that's a good point.
I'd like to add one more
we've
thing.
discussed on this show many times. What's that?
Sorry, what was that?
I was saying, like we've discussed many times here on the show, that there was a time and a place for everything. 25 years ago, I sold quite a few preferred securities. So let me give you an example that the prevailing interest rates on secure bonds is say 7%. And you have $1 million to invest in a bond portfolio. You might put $900,000 in a laddered bond portfolio, but you might take $100,000 and buy some attractive preferred securities that are paying 9%. And you're correct, Drew, that there are unattractive call provisions. But if you can lock in 5 years at 9% and your clients are taking a 6% withdrawal rate, that 9% is pretty attractive. The problem is right now we're not seeing 9%. So the preferred securities, the risks are in very, very high right now in this low interest rate environment. What Tom was saying earlier, when interest rates are extremely high, it's not a bad idea to put in a portion of your fixed income portfolio and preferred securities and just ride that gravy train for as long as you can.
All right.
But if interest rates go down in a high interest rate environment, then the preferred shares will probably just get called. You're not looking for the growth there. You're just looking to reap as much yield as you possibly can until that train stops, right?
Yeah. Bingo. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Good point. All right, we'll move on to decentralized finance. So decentralized finance, or DeFi, has, as the cool kids call it, I guess, has been a pretty big topic in the financial community. And the idea is that you're getting rid of most of the people involved in financial transactions. So the way it works is that if you're going to buy something on your credit card, is that you got to get money from your bank. The credit card will take the money from your if you're going to purchase something and you're going to use a debit card from it, the money has to go from your bank through a payment processing company to the other party's bank to them. And it takes time for this transaction to happen. And essentially what decentralized finance is doing is they're taking out the bank, the payment processing company, and the other person's bank, so that you basically just get like a purely you get like a truly peer-to-peer transaction. And in the financial community, when we place a trade, it has to go through from our computer to a brokerage firm. And then whatever company's stock you buy, they have their own company that's going to register and kind of record where the stock's going to. And then that'll end up at the other brokerage firm, and then eventually into the person who bought its account. And every time we buy and sell a stock, we have something called T+3, where it takes 3 days for that trade to settle. And TD Ameritrade gives us a little bit of help in that they a lot of times will let us place trades a little faster than that, but they have to basically open up like a back-end margin account to keep track of all this stuff. And the same thing with day traders is that they can't just trade at their will. I mean, the brokerage firms have made it so that they can do it. But again, every time, if you're a day trader, you basically have to have a margin account, so that the way they can settle all these trades while you're placing them on your computer. So the idea is that decentralized finance takes the middle, the brokerages and all the people in the middle out, and basically exchanges it and replaces it with a blockchain. And more specifically, that blockchain is the Ethereum blockchain. And then all these transactions can happen faster and more cheaply around the world. So the question is that, do you like the idea around decentralized finance, and what impact do you think it's going to have, and how soon do you think we're going to see that or feel that impact?
Well, anytime you can take the middleman out, I'm in favor of that. It just seems much, much more efficient. The reason why the financial services industry is doing so well is because there's so many regulations that make it virtually impossible for Joe Schmuckatelli to start his own brokerage firm or his own financial institution. The complexity in the regulatory world is so difficult that it's very, very difficult to get into it. So I like the idea. I'm not all that optimistic that we're going to see any major shift in that direction anytime soon, only because I don't think the blockchain lobby armies in Washington, D.C. are much bigger than the size of a squad or a platoon. And yet all the financial services industries, they've got armies that are as large as the Chinese, People's Army. So I just don't see it happening, even though I think it might be a great idea.
I agree. I think it's a great idea. I think it's good to have the options. DeFi right now, to me, is like checking out at Walmart. Basically, you have your human cashiers and you have the automated checkout machines. Right now, I go to whichever line is shortest. I think we're very, very early in the adoption curve. And for a while, it'll be more like a hybrid, like checking out at Walmart. And in that sense, I'm happy, like I said, to have both options. In the long run, I guess the markets will decide which system thrives.
Yeah, agreed. Is that I have no problem with them taking out the middleman, especially in our business where all the back end administration makes it somewhat complicated to place trades. Having like a 3 days settlement time. With mutual funds, we have to basically place trades over 2 days. If they can get rid of that and make these things happen faster and more cheaply, with fewer restrictions, I'm all for it. But this is going to be like one of those mutual agreement questions. The thing is that when are we going to see it? I don't think it's going to be anytime soon, because there's still a lot of security issues. I can't remember what the statistics are, but there was a lot of fraud, and there was a lot of cases of people losing money because somebody hacked into some wallet or something like that. So there's a lot of security issues that have to be addressed first. And then, kind of like Joe said, is that what's going to happen with how the brokerage firms, how the bank's going to adjust this, because this isn't exactly going to be good for business for them.
Yeah. Well, that all pretty much covers all of my bullet points. I not only do I not have any real objection to it, I like it for many of the same reasons everybody else already discussed. There's no good reason from a technological standpoint why it should take 3 days to transfer money between banks or to buy a stock. It happens because there's too many people that make too much money in between the beginning and the end of the process. That's why I think in the short term, we're not really going to see any major changes in the way, the financial system is structured. Longer term, I don't think that these are going to disrupt the financial system. I think they'll be absorbed by it. The big banks, big institutions, central banks, et cetera, will emulate these, and kind of like the Borg, they'll just assimilate anything, and they'll now be like the big institutions along with the rest of them. So long term, I think it'll be a really good for finance. Short term, I think it's still probably going to remain fairly niche.
All right, it's time for the lightning round of our show, where we basically answer a bunch of questions really fast. So for the first question, the first question is: do stock valuations matter? So in light of Tesla and Bitcoin having exorbitant valuations and having little in the way of product or revenue, do you think investors still pay attention to actual valuations anymore, or do you think they just they think they're more speculative?
Yes and no.
Wow, I feel like this question could have deserved a full 3 minutes itself. But yes and no. I like the quote from Benjamin Graham. In the short run, the market is a voting machine, but in the long run, it's a weighing machine. Right now, I don't think investors care, but in the long run, I do think they matter.
Go ahead, Alex.
Same deal, yes and no. More traditional investors do pay attention for more traditional investments, large cap stocks or mutual funds, ETFs, but the increasing number of day traders who buy on frenzy and FOMO don't seem to care at all about traditional valuations. All hype, all frenzy, make money as fast as possible.
Yeah, and I'll say valuations absolutely do matter, but the amount of people paying attention to them is greatly decreased, especially when you get into hype of like Bitcoin and Tesla and whatever else is out there. People tend to pay less attention to valuations, but yeah, absolutely they matter.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
Even with lightning. Fortunately for us, we're momentum investors, so the relative strength of investments is the core of our strategy, and relative strength can mostly ignore valuations.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Are billionaires who go to space, are they astronauts or are they tourists?
Yes and no.
I'm just gonna say tourists.
Tourists over here, unless they're behind the controls or doing something that's a job other than looking out the window and getting photographed, they're tourists.
Yeah, they're absolutely tourists. Astronauts have like years of training, and if bad things happen, they know what to do. Some of these people going up in SpaceX, they've had 4 weeks of training, and then they send them up there, and it's basically mostly controlled from the ground. So they're absolutely tourists.
I so disagree. I mean, you take a look at Jeff Bezos. I would concede that he's probably a billionaire who just thinks it's cool to have a space shuttle in your private airport. But if you're Elon Musk, I think you're just one of those weird black swan individuals who, since you were a little kid, have been dreaming about space, but for one reason or another, you're just not all that enthusiastic about going to the Air Force Academy and then going through the astronaut program. You just read a whole lot of books and talk to smart people and become an astronaut. So it depends on who you're talking to. I think that the answer is yes or no.
Yeah, I agree with that. If my daughter dresses up like a princess, if you ask her, she is 100% a princess. But if you ask anyone else, odds are probably not.
Yeah, I mean, also the fact that Elon Musk has never been to space, so therefore he's not going to be an astronaut. But you get somebody up there like Will Shatner, while he played, the captain of the Enterprise on TV, I doubt he has a lot of qualifications when things start going south, when he's, orbiting around the Earth. So I'm gonna stick with my answer and say no, they're tourists. If Elon Musk goes up there, sure, yeah, you can call him an astronaut, but everybody else, I'm gonna go with no. All right, last question is that, do you serve any other meats besides turkey for Thanksgiving?
No. Turkey is that's the only protein we serve.
Chicken.
Turkey is the main event, sometimes ham.
We always eat turkey, although I wouldn't be opposed to a Papa John's pizza.
Is that a meat pizza or one of these new age tofu pizzas with kale?
No, there will be no tofu, but if you want to save yourself hours of work and still get plenty of enjoyment, I recommend a pizza. All right, well, that's it for episode 20 of Farm to Markets. Remember, if you like what we're doing, go ahead and hit the like button. You can also share it with your friends. Otherwise, we will see you next week.